Welcome to Insights in Sound, where we talk to the people behind the scenes, behind the technology, and behind the music. People you may not know, but you should. And please check out getitInwriting.net/shows for a full list of our podcast YouTube series.
My guest is Simon Jones. He is the VP of Marketing for Yamaha Guitar Group. Did I get that right?
Yep.
Okay. Which is a large organization that has quite an interesting and storied history of its own. We'll get to that shortly. But let's start out with a little bit of how you got to where you are now. You obviously, I'm guessing you started at in a garage in a band somewhere in the UK, banging out the Kinks or something.
How could you tell? I mean, that's, yeah. It's, oh golly, yeah. How far do you want to go back? We could start there and sort of try and briefly go through all that.
Well, what I'm interested in, I'm guessing that your history is fairly typical of many of us in that sense.
Yeah.
But we all take different paths as we go along. I'm sure you've done a lot of music stuff as well as technical stuff.
Yeah.
The marketing aspect of it, to me, is also another whole side of it that people don't understand. So I'd like to start back where you go from musician to having some tech savvy and then understanding the necessity of communication.
Ooh, golly. Well,
How's that?
There's a bit in between, really.
Of course there is.
You know, because I think it started out, as you're absolutely bang on, it was music, and I think, as you said, like a large percentage of the industry, you know, thought they'd be shuffling off to the mailbox to collect their royalty check.
I'm still waiting.
So yes, the band wasn't necessarily the Kinks. I think it was more sort of like in the middle of the new wave of British heavy metal. But it was sort of guided into, look, you know, you got to go off, get yourself, you know, do your education, and then you can do whatever you want. And so it was a question of having the music and then going, okay, what am I going to do to, you know, what's
Feed
my
myself.
What's my education? What's the fallback? And the only thing that I could find, because I was doing sort of physics, maths, and you know that sort of steered in that direction.
Ooh, nerdy stuff.
Although you know I didn't, you know, I wanted to do music, but that was whatever the guidance was. That was
music is very mathematical.
It is, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was in the nerdy area. I liked making things. I liked electronics. I used to build, you know, pedals and guitars and whatnot. And I found two places that I could do an engineering degree in acoustics. One place was acoustics and sort of physical acoustics, vibration. The other one was called electroacoustics. And electroacoustics sounded pretty cool, particularly because they had one unit, I guess you call it here, that was in a studio. And I thought, that's it.
Ooh, yeah.
That's the place I go.
Absolutely.
I'll go to Salford, up in the north, up near Manchester there, and I'll do electroacoustic engineering, which in the end, you know, the studio bit was you know a few hours in a sort of a fairly dodgy studenty type studio.
Right, go get us some coffee, and
that was it. And it was a tiny percentage of it, and the rest of it was just hardcore physics and maths for, you know, 3 years, and then a 4th year out in industry, blowing things up in Norway. But that's a whole different story.
Wow.
So once that was over, came out, had the bit of paper, and it's like, yeah, did the band again, got back into the music, and just had a little bit of fun with that. Obviously, not very rich, not making much money, and you know, a couple of years into that, it's like, okay, well, I better start feeding myself here, and so did sort of fall back on the education, and just started to speculative applications to all the studios and anything that was sort of slightly technical that could be a fit in the UK at the time. But at that time, you know, the studio industry was not having a good time.
Yeah, the incredible shrinking industry.
The incredible shrinking industry.
Yeah.
So, and I actually got my technical break, with a chap called Billy Woodman, who owns ATC loudspeaker technology. And he saw my resume and my CV, and we went and had a great lunch, and it was really good, eye opener for me, and everything went well, and it was the only real lead that I had. And then he said that he didn't have anything right now, but just hang on, and you're an interesting chap, seems to be, seemed to be all right, pretty solid. Nothing happened for a couple of months, and I got a call from him saying that a fellow Australian of his, a guy called David Martin, was looking for an R&D engineer, and he ran a company called Martin Audio, and ATC loudspeaker technology provided some of the drivers for their
that's the connection
for their systems back in the day.
Uh-huh.
And I was just like, well, live sound, what's that? PA systems.
Yeah, that's a completely different set of skills.
Yeah.
But if you were already studying acoustics in that sense, it probably made some sense to you.
Yeah, there was just some application there. So I went down and interviewed with David Martin and got a gig being his sidekick, his R&D engineer.
So this was really nascent days of that company then?
It was, early 90s. So there was just after, shortly after he sold the company to the Tannoy Goodman's International Group. And David was just focusing on engineering and development. And so that was, I was R&D engineer making, making speakers and passive crossovers and playing around.
That's pretty nerdy.
Customizing,
Yeah.
plug-in boards for their analog controllers. And it was just as sort of digital stuff was starting to sort of hit the industry in terms of digital crossovers and things like that. And so with that, within a small company like that, I am getting to the point how the transition to the market, because it is fairly long. It was a case of being in a small company. You've got your hands on everything.
Right.
You've got half a dozen people in there. And in terms of sort of product management, then you sort of essentially that's what you were doing, because you had your hands on everything. You were looking at not only sort of defining the product, looking at the customer group.
Oh, sure.
You're plotting out your Gantt charts. You're looking at what the marketing and positioning is.
Coming up with a bomb and all that stuff.
And, and making the speakers in the warehouse in the back, and so everything. And an opportunity came up in the AES, because I joined the AES Society. AES is the society, isn't it?
Yes, the Audio Engineering Society.
Yeah, the society.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's funny how that works.
Yeah.
The magazine came through, and there was an ad in there for a product manager at JBL in Northridge. So I applied for it.
You were still in the UK?
I was still in the UK.
Uh-huh.
And didn't hear anything. And I remember one of the Plaza shows, which was the Pro Audio show, used to be in Earl's Court.
I remember it well.
Bumping into Mark Gander then. I think there's not many people in the audio industry, or particularly live sound end of the industry, that don't know that name.
And not only that, but he's an extremely recognizable individual, even from half a trade show floor away.
So I bumped into him. I badgered him. Do you get my resume? Blah blah blah. And then, out of the blue, I suppose, we got a call and saying, look, come over, do you want to interview? And to cut a long story short, I ended up as a product manager at JBL, and that was straight off the boat and straight into that. And product management, sort of a stepping away from engineering.
Right, of course.
That sort of there starts the transition, and I really enjoyed being on the customer end of the conversation.
Now, at that point, when you come into JBL is a company that's active in studio and live. Mm-hmm. Were you still focused on live at that point, or was this now an opportunity also to get back into
the studio? No, it was live. I mean,
okay.
my first gig, in fact, it was the JBL had just launched the very first Eon product, right?
Oh, you were handed a bill of goods, weren't you?
It was the very first Eon product. It was just had a massive NAMM show. It was the first sort of real nexus of, here's a powered portable PA speaker.
Yeah.
And there's so much tech in it, to the sort of the aluminium baffle and the dual voice coil.
Yeah.
All of that sort of stuff.
You're getting basically the, just past the beta version of a new thing. Yeah.
It all worked out. And so he said, look, I want you to be the product manager for that. Don't worry, you'll get to know a lot of people very quickly. so that's where that started.
That's understated.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it was that, that was the track.
That's interesting, because for me, doing product management, being a product manager, was what taught me about marketing. Mm-hmm. And an understanding of telling a story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you're the first salesperson in the chain. That's
You
the
are,
way I
you
always
are.
looked at it. It's a product manager. If you can't actually pitch the idea or the why or what's the,
Yeah.
who's it for and why should I care?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
if you can't, so it is, and that's it. You've got to be able to, you start off even from a concept, being able to sort of market what the value of it is.
Well, and I think
own
it
that.
helps to have the perspective of a user. And I think that's something that in some industries is not always the case. But I think in our industry, being someone who can put this into their own hands, whatever it is that you're making, if you have the experience of the person using that, you know those pain points, you know what appeals to them, you know what to make sure is in the design, you know what to make sure is in the manual, even if no one reads it. But I think those are important factors too, being able to really have that firsthand perspective. That's also important to telling the story, I think.
And how much somebody actually going to value it enough to part with money?
Yeah,
And then and then how do you what's next? Once they have that and you have that engagement with them with this particular product, then how do you keep them?
How do you nurture that relationship?
Nurture the relationship, because they've demonstrated that they believe what you told them.
Well,
and now you have to fulfill that, and then you go, okay, well, can you sustain that relationship?
the sustaining it, I think, is the challenge. I remember going through that with a number of brands that, legendary brands. I mean, you've got your Shures and your Ampegs and your Fenders and these kind of brands. You're always going to have people who will be loyal to the death. But then you're going to have people who jump ship, quote unquote, and try the next new thing and stuff like that. And that, to me, as an artist relations person, for example, was a challenge. How do I, because you have these personal relationships with users, especially when you're at this certain level where you're going to these trade shows, you're meeting one-on-one with people. You are often either an artist yourself or or have the experience to be able to empathize with their experience. You have real close friendships at that point with some of these people, and you're nurturing that from a personal perspective, but also from the perspective of brand loyalty, quote unquote. And many, many times I'd rather have the friendship than the brand loyalty, but it's a challenge to balance those, I think, isn't it?
What were some of the biggest challenges of sort of maintaining and sustaining that balance between sort of brand and that personal connection?
The competition, quote unquote. If you think about it, and I'm sure you've gone through this with Line 6 stuff, for example. You have someone who really, really loves some gear that you've made, and they really truly, and typically in a lot of cases, especially if you talk about a brand like Ampeg or like Shure, you've got people who've been using it since they were in diapers, essentially, and my first mic was a 58, or my first amp was an SVT, whatever it is, and then all of a sudden, another company comes out with some cool thing, and especially when artists get up into a certain strata, so to speak, unless you've already got that personal relationship, you can't maintain it as well, because you've got all their handlers in the way, you've got layers of people between them, and you've got different decision makers at that point. Well, my front of house guy says that I sound better in this mic, or yeah, my bass tech really likes this amp, things like that. And especially when you're talking about guitar stuff, because guitar players are an odd combination of nerdy and fickle. All of a sudden, if I plug into this, brand new XYZ box and it gives me a sound that makes me go, ooh, that's my next box. And I think that's a challenge too. And I've literally had artists come to me and say, dude, man, I'm really sorry. I know that, and I've been with you guys forever and everything. And, at a certain point, you just got to say, dude, be happy. You know, but that is a challenge, I think, from an artist relations / marketing perspective, is it not?
Yeah, I mean, there's, you touched upon that. There's sort of thinking here that if it's something like sort of like the layers and the tech, the front of house guy, I think that's something, because there's a sort of an arm's length removed in that, because we did, we did have, we had a really active foray into sort of live sound. We had a wireless microphone product line in line 6, and really understanding that it's not really the artist, the front of house guy is, he's ultimately the decision maker, because that's the to somebody emotionally attached to a microphone if you're an artist. Whereas a guitar, as you just said, if you've got a guitar, it's you emotionally connect with sort of like the wood and the strings and the feel, the resonance, the shape, the fit, the color, and there's all this sort of social aspect as far as the value that it provides, and psychologically, how does it make you feel? A bit like,
and the tonality.
And the tonality, so you have an effect or a piece of gear, then that, it's sort of like, there's a psychological value that it gives you, whereas, an artist and something technical, it needs to do, if you're an artist directly engaging, it needs to do a job, it needs to do a job reliably, and in a way that you can manage the outcome without.
It needs to be, you need to be able to operate it completely right-brained. That's what it is. You don't want, if you're in that artist's chair, you don't want to have to think anything at all about the left brain stuff, how I'm operating this, any of that stuff. Yes, there are many artists who are technical enough to understand it. In fact, most are in this day and age. But
I think you got to be.
Yeah, well, absolutely. But on the other hand, when you're creating, you don't want to be. When you're creating, you don't necessarily want to be engineer and producer.
That was the transition into line 6 for me. Was, you just touched upon something.
That's what I was just leading to.
It was exactly that. It was, and it's something that we noticed creating PA products, live sound products for musicians, for teachers, for non-audio professional, non-audio dedicated professionals. How could you make that as simple as possible and get a good outcome?
Yeah.
And you only had to look at a PA system to know that you have a gain control here, you have a level control there, you've got a input gain here, you've got a master fader here.
Right.
If you don't figure that out,
it's not rocket science. Yeah.
But if you don't know how that works, then it can sound
if you don't understand the gain structure and all that,
and and all you want to do is you want to teach a lesson to your class outside, or you want to play a gig in the pub or something like that.
Right.
And that was the thing that brought me into line 6, is that they were developing this PA system that is really dedicated for musicians. So, if you're in the left brain operation creative thing, you don't want to be a sound engineer.
Yeah.
And hence that was the hook. It's like, oh, that sounds really interesting, because that is a problem that really needs solving. How do you do that? And live sound, that's where you connect with your audience.
It's where you connect with your audience, and it's also where you only get one chance.
Right. You walk in.
We're not painting there. We're photographing.
Right. You walk into a gig and it sounds horrible, and then you walk back out again.
Exactly.
If you can't hear what it's particularly if it's original music, then there's nothing really to engage with unless it's the clarity's there.
Yeah.
So that was really the transition, going, oh, that sounds like a fun problem to solve with technology. And it was all about exactly sort of minimizing the context switching from left brain to right brain, and let you do that. And even the gear that we've got now, and I think that's it's always part of line 6 is the innovation there. It's just provide tools to creatives and provide this massive palette of tones and sounds, but having it a way that makes it accessible, really easily accessible. Take the first, I haven't got one here, but take the first Bean. Why was that so popular?
I don't know, but I just found a bass one the other day in my garage, and now I have to hunt down the power supply for it. I remember being pissed off about that. Damn it!
Might be able to help you out with that.
Oh, thank you. But I love those things, yeah, and the concept of it was just so.
Think about it when it came out. Sorry, I'm sort of turning around, looking at my pathetic little studio setup here, but it was to like the emergence of people recording into the computers. Mm-hmm. You've got a guitarist recording into a computer and going, okay, well, I've got this combo amp. I might have an SM57 sitting around somewhere that I can stick in front of it.
Right.
And, and that's about it. And maybe I've got a few effects. But with that, this thing sat on your desk next to your computer. You just plugged it in and you could sort of dial in a 4x12 cabinet, or you could dial in a JCM 800
in
or
an apartment in Manhattan.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And so
that was the thing.
And it solved, talk about solving a problem. And the value, was there. And yeah, it might have not been sort of apples to apples, bang on the real thing. But
in a mix.
It solved it, and it was all about sort of context switching, keeping the left brain.
Yeah. Line 6 started as an upstart, right? I mean, it's a Marcus.
Yep.
It's a Marcus thing, and Marcus Ryle has
Sue,
yes, in particular has always been, somewhat of a renegade in terms of his view of technology. And I love him for that. Believe me, I think he's a brilliant man. Culturally, a company takes on the personality of the people who form it, obviously. And culturally, that's what Line 6 started out as. As things have evolved, the company's gotten bigger, and culturally now it's owned by a larger conglomerate. For you, at what I would call not ground level, but ground level, you're interfacing with the customers. How do you maintain that personal, to the artist touch when now you're dealing in a corporate kind of setting? Is there a challenge to that for you?
I suppose the easy answer to that is no. We are a fully owned subsidiary of Yamaha Corporation of Japan, and we are part of what is called Guitar Division, which is a business unit specifically focused on the guitar category, which was something that we as an organization, as sort of the Line 6, the core Line 6 with Japan.
That was an understanding.
It was proposed. It was like we need to, if we're going to really put some wood on this fire here, then let's focus on it and let's form a business unit that was specifically focused on guitar.
So they really went out of their way not to kill the goose, so to speak.
It was and in fact it's still it's the spirit that's there, that sort of disruptive innovation, that let's just do it our way, and let's it's always sort of push the envelope and sort of keep pushing the envelope. That is the thing that is actually valued a lot, and sort of maintaining that is very important.
I think it's interesting that they've been able to do that, and that's one of the things that I've always been fascinated with Yamaha as a company, in being able to be so not just multifaceted. I mean, it's a company that makes wave runners, for God's sake, but to be so multifaceted and yet have all of these different entities really function as almost their own companies in that sense. I mean, other than the name, from what I've seen, for example, Ampeg is still Ampeg. They're not Yamaha Guitar Group, even though they're owned by them. Ampeg still has that feeling of Ampeg. You guys still have that feeling of Line 6. In fact, most people don't know, even as much as you've tried with your marketing, releases and everything, most people still call it Line 6.
Which is fine. But it is. I mean, the Yamaha Guitar Group, it's just an organization. It's an organization, a house of which to fit the brands in. And the fact that we have Ampeg, and Ampeg's Ampeg. Ampeg's still got that feel, And and we have the core ingredients of what makes Ampeg great and sustaining those.
Yeah, yeah.
And similarly with Line 6, we don't want to dilute those brands. We want it to be additive, and you leverage one brand, you leverage one brand for another brand, and
Which I've seen that you're doing, yeah, especially with some of the Steinberg technology and whatnot. That's kind of cool, actually.
that all works, and you
Yeah,
can see
yeah.
the sort of cross promoting in content and our campaigns.
I love actually the from a cultural perspective, the idea of a Japanese company and a German group and an American group and all of these different, I love the way that all of that energy works together. It's almost like it shouldn't make sense, but it does. You
Yeah,
know?
it's big, it's broad. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of connective tissue, and sometimes there's some navigation that's required, but
Yeah, yeah.
the actual result is a massive global organization that really there's a lot of possibility, and there's a lot of things going on. So yeah, and it's just from my seat, you've got we're playing with Yamaha guitar branded products, so you have the enormity of that, the reputation, the consistency, the quality, and that value, and we have Ampeg, which is a heritage brand.
Yeah, yeah.
And
You don't break that.
you don't break that, but you have the opportunity to sort of move it forward.
Yeah.
And then you have Line 6, which is the sort of the innovative tech Southern California brand that.
You guys are the tweak heads, man. I mean, Line 6 has always had a reputation of being like the really nerdy, out there effects and stuff like that. And I love that. And again, that's the product of the culture that I think built that company, which is really it's nice to see that hasn't changed. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about trade shows.
Trade shows.
Because I know we've got one coming up.
Yeah.
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 You guys are going to be there.
We are. We're not. We haven't got floor space as sort of an individual brands.
Right.
I mean,
You're not taking over the Marriott this time or anything. Right?
We're not taking over. We used to have in the past few years, or pre-COVID funness, we had a couple of rooms, some suites in the Marriott, so they're across the hall from the Yamaha Corporation of America, the Yamaha area.
Yeah.
This year we're not doing that, but we are working with Yamaha Corporation of America, and we'll have some products on their booth that talking about sort of synergies between the brands. We'll have Yamaha guitars and Ampeg bass amps and Line 6 effects and the new the Line 6 Catalyst amps and things. So we'll be there. We're being efficient in our approach, and I think that's probably it's probably not sort of not an unfamiliar approach to
no, it's not.
many people.
And I think that's that's part of what I'm interested in, the whole idea of how trade shows are changing. Because I do think there's a place for them still. I think they're very viable as community, as gathering of the tribes, so to speak.
For sure, yeah.
And I value that, more than, introducing products, we no longer have that cycle. We're no longer holding things for NAMM. It always used to be that joke that you had to have it ready for NAMM, even if you had a cardboard cutout. It had to be ready for NAMM, NAMM and Music Messe, basically.
So is it a trade show, or is it an industry gathering?
That's the question,
Or
is what is it evolving to?
Is it a branding event? Because and this is where I could sort of see a divergence with a trade show, depending on whether it's sort of a B2B industry or it's a B2C industry.
Yeah. And I think those lines are becoming more and more blurred. I think especially as you have now students coming up, younger people coming up, a lot of times students will join AES, for example, and they are more interested in this, not just to come and look at gear, but to come and connect with other people in our industry. And I think that, the mentorship aspect of it, the just camaraderie aspect of it, to me is the most valuable aspect of a trade show. So maybe it's a misnomer to even call it a
I was
trade
about
show
to say,
anymore.
so,
Yeah.
it's not necessarily a trade show. It's an
event.
It's an event, symposium, or...
It's summer camp. That's what it is, you
Yeah.
know. Well, and it's funny because I always used to joke about that NAMM to me felt like summer camp because, you know, you see these people that you haven't seen in perhaps a year, you know, and hey, what are you doing now? Where are you working now? You know, that was
It's interesting because it's difficult to equate that, equate the value, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And that, you know, there's an immense amount, because if you sort of think about it, right to that opportunistic meeting of that person that you haven't met before at the bar,
Yeah,
and there's
yeah.
a little nugget of an idea or a seed, a seed that's planted that
Something drawn on a napkin. Yeah.
it's exactly that.
Yeah.
And how do you quantify that? And all of those, like, hundreds of thousands of micro interactions
Exactly.
that sort of connect the industry. And it could be the student that comes up that meets Mark Gander in the hallway that says,
Exactly.
hey, yeah, I'm pretty interested in working over there.
Yeah, or just these little serendipitous moments, you know. And I think you need some kind of a gathering of the tribes to make those things, or at least to provide opportunity for those things to happen, you know. And so to me, I think that, you know, I hear people when they say, oh, it's not worth it to us anymore, you know, to do trade show and everything. But I feel sad for that. And I feel like, no, it is worth it to you. You know, it's just, think about the investment on a different level. You know, you're making connections. You are indeed feeding that connective tissue of our industry. And let's face it, people don't get into this industry because they think they're going to get rich. They get into this industry because they love music.
Yeah, no, that's it. You know, they didn't make it shuffling off to the mailbox. But
Exactly,
even if
yeah,
they did,
yeah.
they're in it, you know, and they see it, you know. And
Well, and those that did actually are even more so committed in that sense.
Well, I think, you know, I mean, maybe it's up to us to help guide what that becomes or how that evolves.
Yeah.
Because it's, you know, in terms
Yeah.
of, you know, it changed the discussion and changed the value equation. That it's not about, you're not writing orders or taking orders at the trade show, or the majority of people. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I would.
Well, and
I
the
would
sales
imagine-
channels changed anyway, so
The
you know,
sales
you really don't need a trade show for that.
Right. So how do you
Yeah.
evolve the value equation and go, okay, everybody knows there's a there's something really good, and the fact that they all want to get back and just be, you know, particularly, and I mean, our industry isn't unique. There's probably the Lawn Care Sprinkler Manufacturers Society.
I was just at NAB
Convention.
a couple of weeks ago,
Yeah.
you know, and same thing there. People want to get back.
Yeah.
And it felt like people wanted to connect, you know. And I think that, to me, you know, I've made so many friendships in this industry, because that's what it is, you know. It's we have some people that we consider colleagues and business associates and whatnot, but I think so much more in this industry, they turn into genuine friendships because we share this certain set of values, I think, many of us. And, you know, that, to me, I mean, you can't keep in touch with everybody all the time, but a trade show, quote unquote, a gathering, you know, is a great impetus for that. And maybe it comes down to making these events more about educational, about learning, and having the exhibits, quote unquote, you know, the booths be sort of a sideshow. I don't know, you know, that each company doesn't bring, you know, a small building's worth of trade show booth and all of that stuff, you know. I mean, do we really need 2-story booths? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah. That's great
Yeah.
commentary. Great observations. Because it's, yes, we need to get back together. Absolutely. People need to connect with people. People engage with people. You can only really, you know, you truly empathize with somebody when you're sat looking them in the eye.
Exactly.
And really sort of, you know, all the micro expressions that go into sort of acknowledging where somebody's coming from.
Exactly.
You can't do that through a screen. So you know, yes, humans need to interact with humans. So it's just going to be super interesting, you know. I mean,
I think so.
I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to going. I'm looking forward to just experiencing how the NAMM event in June sort of starts to sort of indicate or give some direction on how it does evolve, and there could be some really good when we met, we knew each other before, but really sort of got to know each other based on Karen being super innovative and
Absolutely, yeah.
using the technology available and going, look, I'm going to carry on connecting people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, this is the sort of disruptive, the innovation that is required. And
It's a hybrid. It really is. I love the idea. I mean, I liked video calling before it became the thing to do, because I like being able to see facial expressions. But at the same time, yeah, there's a limit to that. You're in a window and then you turn off that window and boom, the interaction's gone, But for me, that's one of the reasons that, I do shoot some of these episodes as Zoom calls, especially if they're geographically unfeasible, what do you do? But at the same time, if I can do it live, I value that interaction with a human being,
But the tech now has evolved that you've got more reach, that you can do it. It's additive now. You can add that if
Exactly.
you can't get across the country or across the continents. So, yeah, so that's really sort of positive. I mean,
It is.
it's just, I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, it's battered. COVID's battered us, but out of that, we got to go, okay, it's
How do we evolve?
How do we evolve? And trade shows or whatever, that's one element that I think it will be redefined, and that will evolve.
So let me ask you the question I ask a lot of people in this series. You're 15 years old coming up now and you're impassioned with music. What would you advise yourself in this day and age?
Oh, in this day and age.
You can no longer intern at a studio and any of that stuff and, come up in the ways that many of us came up. Oh. What are the opportunities now?
The opportunities. Well, this is the crazy thing because it's almost overbearing the amount of potential and opportunities, I think, which makes it harder. And you look at the world completely blown wide open through the social channels and people's ability to see, it's not only about now tuning into the TV, this particular station, somebody's doing a travel show and it's on this particular country, right now, anytime, anywhere, you could dial in, what is this person, I'm going to connect with this person doing this in the Philippines. What's your you can connect with that.
I'm curious about Vanuatu. It's everything is at your fingertips.
It's at your fingertips, and it's coming at you at such ferocity that how the hell do you pick, right? Where do you can do anything. You're in a world now that essentially you have access to anything,
Close to it,
So how challenging is that to actually pick a direction?
Well, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges for younger people right now, especially, is not knowing what the options are, because it's so overwhelming. There are so many. I mean, I have had situations where I've, for example, I did a panel a couple of years ago on sound design, and we were talking about the different types of sound design for games, for synths and stuff like that. All these different people came up to me. A couple of young students came up to me afterwards and said, I had no idea that was even a thing. I didn't know those jobs existed. And I think that's not that uncommon to really not even be aware of the opportunities.
It's a stupid old cliche that it's like, look, do something you love and forget about everything else, and just go for it. And while you're 15 years old, you haven't got everything. It's just you, right? It's you, and that's the direction, and head in it, and just keep doing the things that make you happy,
and be ready to be diverted.
Be ready to be diverted, yeah.
Because I think for all of us, that serendipity of those chance encounters and all that stuff, that's really what,
It happens. I mean,
Yeah.
here I am. I started making guitars in deepest, darkest Worcestershire in England. And the next thing you know, I'm back doing guitars I couldn't be more guitar-y.
Yeah,
And it's just like, oh my God, how did that happen? And it is through just, sort of navigating. There's some decision points and opportunities, and in anything there's sort of luck, I mean, the fact that you're still healthy that's certain amount of
Absolutely.
luck involved in that.
Yeah.
But it's sort of like just go for it.
Just trust the path.
Just trust the path, and just be honest with yourself and true to yourself, and be you. Really be you, and not worry about trying to replicate what somebody else is doing.
Well, and that's the thing too, because, especially at a younger age, each of us is lacking a certain confidence. And so you always kind of model yourself after somebody else. And then it finally occurs to you at some point in your life that, oh, wait, I don't need that person as a role model. I'm doing something else, And I think that is what happens, but it's not something you're conscious of when you're younger.
No.
You're just coming up.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. Good advice.
For what it's worth.
For what it's worth. Yeah, exactly. Simon Jones, thank you for being my guest.
Well, thank you very much for having me on. Really enjoyed it.
It's a pleasure. Hey, I'm Daniel Keller. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join us each week for Insights in Sound.